Hi, good morning, or afternoon, or evening, or night, whatever it is for you. It's like 6 a.m., 6:30 a.m. for me. Um, I couldn't sleep, and I slept 4 hours. I couldn't go back to sleep, and I just have this thought in my head over and over again that I want to make this video. And well, um, I drank a bit too much last night. I guess that's very common for me. And I've been rereading Thomas Schelling, Choice and Consequence, and that book and Strategies of Commitment are books where he talks about like this is a pretty universal problem. Is most of us have something like if we have one or two drinks, we end up drinking more than we wanted to. And well, the easy solution that I've been mulling over in my head is to just only bring $20 with me when I go to a bar. Then I'll only be able to buy 3 drinks. There is in Edward Slingerland's book Drunk, he does talk about like actually there is a lot of evidence that at about the 2 or 3 drinks mark, most people generally are actually happier. Everything kind of becomes more positively framed. People are generally more creative. And so it does seem to be the case that if you can limit yourself to only having 2 or 3 drinks, that would in fact be better than having no drinks in some psychological sense. At least that's what Drunk by Edward Slingerland kind of concludes in some ways. And you might conclude that also by reading Thomas Schelling, is that if you in fact have a better time by having 2 or 3 drinks, but you kind of irrationally want to drink more after that, finding some way to force yourself to only be able to have 2 or 3 drinks, but to still have 2 or 3 drinks would actually be like the most effective outcome. By the way, I'm very calculated about what I drink or how I interpret what I drink. Most people aren't necessarily aware of this, but you can calculate like how much you've drank. What they generally say is a 5-ounce glass of 12% wine is one standard drink, or a 5% beer, 12-ounce is a standard drink. So either way, that's 60-ounce percents. And you can basically find that for any drink. For instance, I drink Weihenstephaner Hefeweißbier, which is 5.4% alcohol, and it comes in a 16.9-ounce container, which comes out to something like 1.52 standard drinks. And for women, one standard drink actually hits closer to like 1.5 standard drinks, because women just biologically metabolize alcohol a bit more poorly than men. Regardless of weight, they just do. And there are like some ethnic differences. For instance, some East Asians have what's called like the Asian flush, where they essentially are horrible at metabolizing alcohol, and they feel extremely sick, and alcohol hits them extremely hard. And so, but yeah, for generally people, you can calculate how many standard drinks you've had by just multiplying the ounce in the alcohol percent and dividing by 60, and that's how many standard drinks you've had. So yeah, so I had and the standard estimate is that you metabolize one standard drink per hour. I try to be a little more conservative and say maybe it takes an hour and a half to metabolize the standard drink. Anyway, so something like I had one bottle of Weihenstephaner yesterday at like 1, and that's 1.5 drinks. So 1.5 times 1.5 is something like 2.5. So basically it took me 2.5 hours to metabolize that. And that's what I did. I waited like 2.5 hours. And then at like 5 or something, I started drinking again. I had like 2 or 3 more bottles of Weihenstephaner. And that would have been fine. But then I had a bottle of cider. And cider, for some reason, just makes my stomach feel quite a bit worse. In fact, I don't I'm very particular about what I drink. I don't drink hard alcohol. I don't drink red wine. I don't drink beer, except for Hefeweizen, wheat beer. Um, and now I can't even really drink cider because it just makes me feel sick. One day, like 2 years ago, I drank a bottle of red wine, and my body was not able to really metabolize that very well, and I literally threw up the entire next day. And yeah, ever since then, I just cannot drink red wine. Just the smell, the thought of it makes me sick. And now the same is true for cider. For some reason, cider just makes me sick. Yeah. But anyway, so I wanted to make this video because I wanted to, I don't know if it'd be useful for other people, or maybe it's just useful for me. If you were to read like some social psychology books, like Redirect by Timothy Wilson, I'm sure this idea shows up in other books too. But creating like a self-narrative of your life and why things happened to you the way they did, and how and why you ended up the way you are, can be a useful exercise. It's useful for you because having a coherent narrative of why you are the way you are, why things happen the way they did, it kind of lets you psychologically relax, to not worry about things as much anymore. You don't have to be constantly thinking about your fear or anxieties of things if you have like a coherent narrative of why your life went the way it did. And yeah, and if someone can like learn some life lesson or something from this, then fine. But it's really just to create a coherent narrative, just to, I don't know, yeah. And I should also say that humans, for the most part, have this like what would you call it? Like an ego preservation, a self-affirmation bias, a psychological immune system. So generally, as useful as it might be to have like a coherent narrative about your life, it's also the case that you're also biasing like why things happened. You have a self-serving bias. We all do. So generally, when we do good things, we'll generally like assume that it's because we're really good people, like it's some innate natural tendency of ours. And when we do bad things, we'll just assume that it's like due to some external context, some situational factor that we were not necessarily in control of. And so like you should just be aware of that. Everyone should be aware of that we have these self-serving biases, and everything in our lives are kind of framed through this self-serving bias. And so as much as we'd like to think that we do good things because we're just good people, and we do bad things only because we're forced to, the truth is nuance, and there are different ways to frame and interpret things. So my upbringing, at the time I thought it was perfectly normal. Maybe that's what happens with everyone, is we just assume our lives are perfectly normal. We don't think anything of it until much later. So I grew up in a trailer park. I thought that was perfectly normal. My mom was a single mom. My dad lived 300 miles away. I thought that was perfectly normal. My mom worked minimum wage at a library. I thought that was perfectly normal. Like, aren't we all poor and single parents and living in a trailer park? Isn't everyone like that? But only later did I realize, like, actually, no, like, there's a lot of, like, I don't know, social statistical data that show, like, no, I don't know what the percentage is now, but a quarter of all people are raised by single parents, and in fact, they have, like, significantly worse life outcomes, psychological outcomes. Yeah, and being poor, living in a trailer park, has a number of, like, probabilistic, like, chances that you'll end up poor life outcomes, poor psychological outcomes, poor educational outcomes. And so on a purely statistical, like, Bayesian basis, living in a trailer park with a single mom who makes minimum wage, like, you would expect that child would end up having a very poor life outcome. But it's more nuanced than that. My mom and dad were together until I was maybe 8 or something. My dad still lived 300 miles away, but he would visit a couple times a month or something, spend time with my mom. After that, when they broke up, they were never married to begin with. And I'm sure you could do some statistical categorization of people who were raised by single parents who were never married, and people who were raised by single parents who were married then divorced. And I don't know, maybe if your parents were never married to begin with, like, that's just indicative of lower socioeconomic status and lower life outcomes, and it's not quite the same. And if your parents are uneducated and poor like mine were, then, that's also very different than if your parents are pretty well off and educated and you have a single parent. You probably have very different life experience. But there's nuance to that too, because like my uncle and grandpa did pretty well for themselves on my mom's side. So they helped a little bit. I got like private violin lessons when I was like 13. Not a lot of people did, but I did because I guess maybe my grandpa or uncle or someone helped my mom to afford them. And I don't know, sometimes my uncle would like just lecture me. He is a very smart person, extremely well-read, not formally educated, but very, very well-read, very intelligent. And so he would just lecture me on good manners, just being cultured, being intelligent, just ideas that are useful. But yeah, so my dad, I would see my dad, after I was like 8, I would see my dad maybe once a month. He would come up to visit, and we would just spend a weekend at like a cheap motel, play at the pool, and that's it. That's when I saw my dad. So he wasn't completely absent. He wasn't dead. I'm sure there are many children who grew up like that, but he also wasn't very supportive. He wasn't really there psychologically, which I'm sure many people, even if they're raised by single parents, still have like a pretty good interactions with their dad who's very supportive of them, and that's not necessarily what I had. But yeah, and then I would see my dad in the summer. I'd spend like a few weeks. He lived with my grandma and grandpa on my dad's side, and I would visit him for a few weeks. They were a Native American family, by the way. Even though my skin is white, I'm pretty much half Native American, and I've been wondering about this lately. If you were to read like Living Color by Nina Jablonski, you would know that Native Americans are a little different than Old World races of humans. Whereas in the Old World, people essentially evolved to fit in their environment. For instance, equatorial Africans, equatorial Asians are extremely dark-skinned, and that's because over like tens of thousands of years of evolution, like they just adapted to living there. And the same is true for like Slavics and Northern Europeans. Over like tens of thousands of years of living in the far north, they just evolved to have like pale skin. And so in the Old World, basically because people have lived in that environment ancestrally for so long, like they basically evolved to have skin color that matches that environment. As opposed to Native Americans who originally are from like Siberia 20,000 years ago. Because they populated the Americas within the course of 10, 15,000 years, they didn't actually evolve to have darker skin color in the same way that Old World peoples have darker skin color. Old World peoples, their skin color is almost stable. So if you're from Southern Europe, you have olive skin. If you're from Africa, you have dark skin. If you're from Northern Europe or like Slavic Eastern Europe, you have white skin. And that's pretty much set. Your skin color doesn't vary very much. But East Asians and Native Americans are actually a little different. Their like base skin color is quite a bit lighter than you would otherwise predict, and then they just tan very well. And so Native Americans, like, it's not necessarily the case that their skin is just red. Now, maybe if you get into the Central Americas, maybe there is some adaptations, genetic adaptations that make them have significantly darker skin because they're closer to the equator. But for like North American, Native Americans, it's more likely that they just had like a light skin tone, almost white, maybe not quite white, and then like the genetic adaptations they had just meant that they just tanned really well and they became red through sun exposure. And so, and I've asked ChatGPT this because I've been curious too. Why am I half Native American but my skin is white? Actually, my grandpa on my dad's side, he does have German in him, and he did have blue eyes, so he did have something like half Northern European ancestry and half Native American ancestry. And yet my grandma on my dad's side was pretty much full-blooded Native American as far as like I can tell through ancestry. She was pretty much full-blooded Apache. She even spoke, apparently. She spoke Apache when she was growing up. English was her second language. Yeah, so like, why is it that you can be half Native American pretty much and have white skin? I guess it's because Native American base skin color, like the genetics for Native American skin color, is not necessarily red. It's something else, and then it just tans to red. So I suppose I inherited extremely pale skin from my Northern European side on my mom's side, and whatever Northern European my dad's dad had. And what I did inherit from the Native American part was like the ability to tan. So I have very pale skin, but I can tan a bit, which old world peoples, that's impossible. If you have very pale skin, you essentially can't tan. But yeah, so spent a little bit of time when I was a kid in the summers with my grandma and grandpa and my dad, and they were a Native American family. My grandma was Apache, my grandpa was Lakota Sioux, and yeah, I just grew up half Native American pretty much. And now I did want to say this, that kids teased me a lot for being Asian or Mexican, because I suppose they didn't know what I was. Well, young men tease each other a lot. That's perfectly normal. In fact, there might even be a name for that. It's like a play derogation. It's part of like masculinity. Growing up a man is that you learn how to derogate other men, and you learn how to take derogation, maybe flip it around. That's just like part of growing up being masculine. And a lot of women don't understand that. I know like Deborah Tannen and her books about linguistic differences between the sexes and psychological differences between the sexes. It's just clear, like men grew up being rough to each other, and that's like their way of preparing for being an adult, and girls don't. And I think it was like in Roy Baumeister's book, Is There Anything Good About Men?, that basically he said, like, look, anytime women want equality and they want to be treated like men, they don't like it, because men are rough with each other. Men derogate each other. That's how they, like, I don't know, play with each other. And women don't like that. Women are not accustomed to being derogated and being played rough with, generally. So kids tease me a lot as a kid for being Asian, or Mexican, even though I'm Native American. And I've thought about like this a lot. Why is it that they didn't just know I was Native American? And this gets into another topic, and it's the idea that Native Americans were pretty much exterminated by white people. every time people talk about Nazis and how horrible Nazis are, I can't help but think, like, don't you know that what Nazis tried to do with Jewish people, like white people did do with Native Americans? They pretty much killed all of them. The only Native Americans who survived were the ones who were on very marginal environments, like in the desert, or put in reservations, or somehow got away. Even Native Americans who like worked with white people, like in the like French Indian War or other like early colonial wars, like the white people just turned against them anyway and killed them or put them on reservations. So yeah, like the surviving Native Americans are very few, and like the tribes that did survive, like for instance, I'm Apache and Sioux, like those were very warlike tribes. So essentially, one of the only ways to survive white people, like genociding against Native Americans, was to be extremely warlike, just to be very violent and to like fight back as hard as you can. Like that's one of the only ways to survive against white people. Yeah, and I've thought about it a lot. Like some people probably did pretty bad things to survive against white people, and I don't know what those things are, but I'm sure like you know, it could be the case that running from your family or turning in your friends or just doing all kinds of horrible things, like that's how you can survive white people, is by doing the things that you need to do for survival. Yeah, and I've thought about this a lot. Like Christians, in the name of Christianity, have killed so many people throughout the world. Not just Native Americans, but like Africans, Asians, indigenous, like Polynesians, Australians. Almost everywhere Christians have went, they essentially try to kill and enslave everyone in the name of Christianity. And people say that maybe that's just human nature. And I mean, people also just deny it. But if you read any decent book, like on history, like there's American Holocaust by David Stannard. There's Charles C. Mann's book, 1491, 1493. There's Jared Diamond's book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, Collapse, The World Until Yesterday. Like, pretty much any of these books will tell you that, in fact, like, anywhere white Christians go, they try to kill and enslave everyone. And, yeah. So, Christmas, I really don't like the idea of Christmas because in the name of Christ, so many people have been killed. Jews, Muslims in the Crusades, like, and you can say, well, maybe they're not Christians, maybe they didn't practice Christianity, but I'm sure they would disagree with you. I'm sure they very much believed that they were Christians. And one interpretation is like, so when people go out and just kill other people, like they do it because it's like this game theory, maybe this evolutionary basis of like ethnic violence. Maybe we're all kind of predisposed somewhat to do that if we can get away with it. And then everything else is just a post hoc rationalization. So it may not necessarily be the case that white people went to the Americas and fully believed that they were serving Christ and Christianity by killing Native Americans. Maybe they just, you can go to the Americas and kill everyone. And as a post hoc rationalization, you say, oh, it's because Christ. It's because Christ wanted us to kill people. And like, so lately I've been listening to Razib Khan on YouTube, and he talks about like tracing early European genetics and tracing population movements. And it's clear there's a long history in Europe of like ethnic tribes, basically exterminating ethnic tribes whenever they get the chance. And he says like the Yan Maya from like present day Ukraine are like the ancestors of most like modern Europeans. And that's essentially what they did. They went and conquered and exterminated whoever they could. And they're very good at it, apparently. Yeah, so it could just be like this is kind of human nature. It's like a game theory, like a political realist thing. Like people just vie for power whenever they get the chance. Maybe that's all, like, or maybe not all, but like a large chunk of what we're doing in the world is we're just collecting into groups and vying for power against other groups. And whoever wins writes the history, pretty much. There's very little ethical, moral, or intellectual or progress. Like, as an ends, like being pursued. It's more just groups vying for control, and whoever wins kind of post hoc rationalizes that they were right because of this, or the other side was wrong because of that. That's very much what human history is. There's not particularly all that much progress or ethical things going on. It really seems to be, it's pretty much groups vying for power, and the victors reframe everything as if they were in the right the whole time. Which leads me to lately I've been thinking about Christmas and how, you may not know this, but most of Christmas is actually based on Yule from the Scandinavians and the Norse. And my culture anthropology professor in college, Dr. King, Timothy King, he told us that most of what is Christmas, like Christmas trees, Santa Claus, are essentially Norse traditions of like worshiping Odin. Odin is basically Santa Claus. If you look at pictures, Santa Claus is basically a Christian reinterpretation of Odin, who rode on a chariot, and maybe this is even related to Jan Maya. The Jan Maya rode on chariots with battle axes and killed people. Maybe this is like a deep part of European culture, is to worship a godlike figure who rides on a chariot and is really good at killing people. So that's pretty much who Santa Claus was. He was Odin, who was very effective at riding on chariots and killing everyone. And so the Christians just reinterpreted Odin to be this like Santa Claus figure. And most cultures have something like Christmas. Most cultures, there are functional aspects to holidays in which you get together with friends and family. It's just functional to like remind yourself of everyone else and to be with other people, as like a socially sanctioned thing. But specifically Scandinavians, because they lived in the far north, where the deep winter was a very dangerous time, and you could be very likely under threat of dying from starvation. The Norse and the Scandinavians inadvertently, culturally came up with Yule, where basically in the middle of winter, when you're most liable to starve to death or to die from being frozen to death, you would visit like your family and friends and make sure they're okay. So that's pretty much what Christmas comes from, is the Scandinavian Odin worship, and just this Yule of like checking up on people in the middle of winter when they might die. When I was a kid, I was part of like Native American clubs, and it was always ironic because most of us were white or looked white. And it always kind of bothered me, like, why are all these people telling me they're Native Americans when they're clearly like 1/16th, 1/32nd Native American? I'm like half Native American, but we all look white. And I realized, like, well, maybe that's just because, Native Americans didn't survive white people's genocide very well. If they did, it's probably from intermixing or passing as white. I'm sure my grandpa had some advantages in life for somewhat passing as white, just as I probably do. I probably have some advantages in life or privileges I'm not even aware of, because I kind of pass as white, even though I'm half Native American. But there are other disadvantages that people don't understand, that I don't come from privilege. I'm half Native American. I come from a lot of poverty, a lot of family problems. But so when I was a kid in Native American clubs, a lot of the people were pretty much white, and that always bothered me. But maybe that's just how it is, that most Native Americans kind of disappeared or intermarried a bit, and that's like all that's left for the most part. Anyway, so not long after my mom and dad broke up, I started doing poorly in school. There's a saying in it's a song by Notorious B.I.G. Juicy, where he says, considered a school because I dropped out of high school, another story of a black male misunderstood. So that's pretty much kind of my life too. It's not just black males. It's like people who come from poor social economic situations, people who come from broken families. Like, they drop out of school because like life stresses get in the way and their values get kind of mixed up, and people just assume they're not smart because they don't do well in school. So I didn't do well in school. There were some times in my life where I did extremely well in school. The first year or two of middle school, I should say like the last year of elementary school, I was put into GATE, Gifted and Talented Education, for like, I don't know, 4 students, the top 4 students in the school. And I suppose I was pretty smart or something. But when I went into middle school, that's when I started doing very poorly in school. And not all classes. I was very like, I want to say rational or efficient about it. I didn't think that studying literature was useful, so I just did not care about doing anything in literature class or history class or English, social studies, any of that. But I did like math, and I thought math was kind of useful. I wanted to be like a physicist. I read a lot of Michio Kaku as a kid and Albert Einstein, and I wanted to be a physicist like them. So I did do really well in math. In fact, my first year middle school math class, I was the top of the class. Not only was I at the top of the class, but they had like a school-wide test that they wanted to like rank the students, and so they basically had this test that got harder every time you finished it. And your math class for 1 or 2 days would just have tons of tests, and like your score on these tests would be ranked. And if you finished it, and you started on the next test, and essentially I finished like 3 times as many tests as anyone else in the school. And so yeah, I just apparently was that much better at math than the rest of the school. But ironically, I didn't show up to the for like the picture. There was a picture for all the top like 6 students who did this math test, and I was the top student. I had like 2 or 3 times the score of the second best student, but I didn't show up for the picture. I was kind of, well, that's what happens when I guess you have family problems and you're from a poor family and you just have life problems. You just kind of want to detach from the rest of society. You become a nonconformist. You don't really want to, I don't know, participate in things like that. So I didn't. And yeah, I started pretty much failing all my classes in school, and that continued until high school. I did try to do well in math classes, and I generally did do well, but otherwise I essentially scraped by. I got D's in pretty much everything, and I just barely passed high school. But there were still signs that like maybe I was intelligent. For instance, out of high school, I went to college, and well, my mom moved out. I had to live on my own, and I had to find work because I was on my own now, and so I dropped out of college after like the 3rd week or something, and yeah, I worked. I had to find work. Not everyone has the privilege of being taken care of while they're in college, and in fact, that would continue until, just now. This is like 10 years later. I did graduate college just this year, and I had to work full time the whole way through, and I just didn't have the privilege of the other students who don't have to work, who can spend all their time at school and doing extracurriculars and studying and being with friends and all that stuff. I didn't have time for any of that. I had to work the whole time I was in college and university. But yeah, that was true even when I was 18. I had to drop out of college and find work. And yeah, so that's what I did. And in fact, my college was a good hour drive from where I lived, because I lived in a pretty rural part of Northern California, where the nearest college is pretty much an hour drive away. And so that made going to college very difficult, and it made my time very difficult, especially because I had to work around that, and I had to pay for the gas to do that. So yeah, going to college was almost a non-starter in my life because of all those situational effects. And after that first quarter or semester, I did go back like a year later, and I took like programming and computer repair classes. And I remember being the top student in those classes because I guess it was something I cared about, something I thought was useful, something I tried in. And once again, I was the top student. I finished the exams like in half or a third the time of the other students, and I got A's for the most part. So there's always been signs, I guess, that if I put my mind to something and I'm not stressed out in life and not have all these other situational factors, that I could do well in school. But yeah, then I had to work. But that was also so early 2013. I would be just turning 19 going on 20, and the beginning of 2013. And that's when I had a house fire. My dryer caught on fire in the trailer that I was living. And essentially, I didn't have any other options. And I was kind of raised to be a bit, what's the word? Set in my ways. What's the word for that? Anyway, I didn't want to accept help. Basically, is what I'm saying. I didn't want to accept help. So when my house caught on fire, and I called 911, they put it out, but all the walls were covered in smoke damage, and probably who knows what other things burnt up and was chemically intoxicating the house. But I didn't want to accept help by like moving somewhere else or anything like that. So I pretty much just lived in that trailer, that burnt out trailer, for like a year and a half. And I'm certain that I developed some type of, I don't know, brain damage or something. And to be honest, I started hearing voices. Everything that I would hear would somehow be interpreted in my mind as a voice telling me things. And usually it was insults. Usually the voices I heard were just insulting me. And this is where I want to introduce a couple concepts that are useful that, my main problem with society today is that people don't read books. People are extremely, extraordinarily ignorant, and they just don't have it in them. They don't have the values. They don't care about going out of their way to read or learn any of these things, but I did. So, for instance, I used to listen to a lot of science podcasts. I forget where I would hear this, but there's something called pareidolia. Pareidolia? Which is basically where the human brain is just adapted to see faces and things. So you look at random spots of ink, you look at, the leaves on a tree, you look at the patterning of paint on a wall, and somehow your brain just like sees faces in them and patterns. Your brain just is predisposed to see faces and things. And for instance, Daniel Dennett and probably Richard Dawkins, I forget who came up with the idea, but there's something called like the agent detector principle, which is that humans are just predisposed to think that there's someone causing things all the time. So that's one explanation for why gods exist, why people have religion, is because they just have this agent detector principle where they, the wind blows really hard and we think, who did that? That must have been a person who did that. And, a fire starts, and who did that? Who must have started the fire? We're just predisposed to think that there's someone behind things, someone causing things, some entity or something. That's called the agent detector principle. And there's something called, I don't know if there's a name for it, but there's a book called Good Reasons for Bad Feelings by Randolph Nesse. And it just explains, like, you can analyze a lot of psychological pathologies and just other parts of human nature by just analyzing, like, what are the systems involved? How did they evolve? Why did they evolve? And, like, just how are the systems designed to work? So if it's the case that humans are just predisposed to detect agents when they're there, there's evolutionary reasons for that. Maybe it's pretty good idea to see a face through a trees, if through a bush, if there is in fact a face there, because you might be wrong 9 times out of 10, but that one time that you're right, it could be someone trying to kill you. So it's actually adaptive to have this like over interpretation of seeing faces and things, and maybe it's adaptive to have this like linguistic capability to hear words in things. And so probably my guess is there's a system in place in our minds to see faces when they're not there, because maybe there is a face there, and to maybe hear words when they're not there, just in case there is someone saying something. And maybe that system can get a little disequilibrated, a little out of order, and so it just over interprets things as being words or faces. And so, yeah, basically, because of that smoke damage and maybe other life stresses, who knows, things would just sound like they were words. I'd hear like a car going by, and it would almost, like the screeching of the tires somehow sounded like words to me. My brain would somehow interpret them that way. And yeah, pretty dark time of my life, and it lasted maybe 5 years or something, where I was hearing things, sounds that were somehow interpreted in my mind as words. And there's another idea. It's in Good Reasons for Bad Feelings by Randolph Nesse, but it's also in The Anatomy of an Epidemic by Robert Whitaker, which is that like the brain, the brain has this like immune system capability, this like equilibrium function, and it wants to remain balanced. And so, in fact, if you give people like depression medicine, the net result may be that, like, say, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, like they actually decrease the amount of serotonin your brain like absorbs. Your brain may just compensate like an immune system type of function, like by trying to keep equilibrium, by just producing even more serotonin. And so the net result is like your brain becomes even more out of whack by taking psychological drugs that are meant to help you. And so, I just, for my whole life, I've always been very skeptical of drugs. I've just always seen them as unnatural. And for the most part, I've avoided taking drugs whenever necessary. That's changed lately with like Tylenol and stuff, because, who wants to have headaches and stuff? But yeah, for the most part, I've just avoided taking drugs whenever necessary, whenever I can. So I never took anything. And I think maybe that's part of the reason why I recovered pretty well. Maybe if I did take drugs, I would have not recovered very well, because my brain would have maybe responded by keeping equilibrium and doing all kinds of changes, internal changes, like Robert Whitaker describes in The Anatomy of an Epidemic. And in fact, in Good Reasons for Bad Feelings by Randolph Nesse, he kind of says, like, if you want to solve depression, just have someone like eat a really healthy diet and like jog for an hour a day. And that'll just like cure any psychological disorder, because it's just like so much of our lives are unhealthy. Like if you just remove the wheat, or not the wheat, but the meat, the refined starches, refined carbohydrates, sugars, flours, and just eat like fresh fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, and seeds, and just exercise a lot, like maybe your brain will just heal from whatever it may have wrong with it. And so I tried a number of things in that dark time of my life where I was suffering from that. I tried things. I did in fact jog an hour a day. And I did almost starve myself. I tried fasting. I would only eat like 1 meal a day at the end of the day. And I tried meditation. I would meditate for half an hour at a time. I would just clear my mind and just let my mind be empty. And I did that for like a year or two. When I moved out, my mom basically offered that I just move out of that place and move in with her. And when I did, I was like 115 pounds, 5'7", 5'8", 115 pounds. I was pretty much bones. I was essentially like an anorexic person, because that's like the tactic that I did to try to like heal my brain, and it kind of worked, but it also made me extremely skinny. And yeah, it was just a dark time in my life. I got very paranoid, and I came up with weird hypotheses, weird theories about why I can hear voices. Like one theory that I had was like maybe someone implanted something in my brain. Like how else would I explain why I'm hearing this, like these voices? Or one was like there must just be someone like around the corner who's always talking to me. Why is there someone around the corner all the time talk to me? And yeah, I came up with weird theories to try to explain what was going on. But of course, eventually I just realized like, no, it's just like, it just my brain is like in disequilibrium and it's over interpreting everything as voices and words. And honestly, um, well, it led me to read a lot of books that I would have not otherwise read. Um, One idea I had was like maybe it's voodoo. Maybe someone casted a voodoo spell on me. I should read a book on voodoo. So I read a book. I read Tell My Horse by Zora Neale Hurston, and it like introduced cultural anthropology to me. I learned like, oh, you could just read about other cultures and what they believe. And yeah, they believe in voodoo, but like there's like a functional aspect, like there's social, functional, cultural, anthropological functions to random beliefs and superstitions and practices that people have, rituals. So yeah, I started reading books about like just things that may or may not help, and it just kind of expanded my horizon a bit. I did want to say that during that time when I was hearing things, I let's see, I was gonna say something about kind of lost my train of thought there, but I just listened to a lot of podcasts, a lot of science podcasts. Tried to learn as much as I could. Um, but yeah, so basically, yeah, I suffered from that for like 5 years, maybe I would say, until I was like 26 or something. That's when my parents died. That was like 7. I don't know what it is, 7 years ago now. Yeah, 7 years ago. Both my parents died from different reasons. And yeah, I had to learn how to be an adult, pay all my own bills, just kept working as much as I could. I decided to go back to college because, who wants to just work their whole life? I was also just extremely bored. I read lots of books all the time, and I just thought, why am I? Well, a lot of people recommended it too. They said, why are you spending all this time reading books? You're so smart. You're learning so much. Why don't you apply it and like get a college degree out of it? So I did, and went to Foothill College. Was the top of my class in almost everything I did. Graduated with President's Medal. Was like the top 1% of the school, while working full time. And I don't like to admit it necessarily, but I didn't study. I never had to study. Um, it's like a curse and a gift that I never had to study because I could pass exams and do very well in school just by paying attention in the class. Better than most, if not all, the other students, just from paying attention without having to study. But the downside is in a class that's very memorization heavy, in which you do need to study. I never built up the habits or the practice of studying. So some classes in which I should have studied later on, I never studied. So I maybe did more poorly than I would have liked to. Then I went to Santa Clara University. Had to take out a massive loan to pay for it, but I thought it was worth it. I honestly don't think it was worth it. But I did at the time, and maybe it will turn out to be worth it. I don't know. But once again, I was the top of my class in almost everything without having to study and while working full time. And during my last year or so, I just got very disillusioned. Like, why am I doing this? This isn't helping me in my life. No one's respecting me for being smart. I just don't see it playing out well. So my last year there, I kind of stopped trying a bit, and I basically my first year and a half there, I got straight A's. I would have had summa cum laude. I would have been the top like 0.5% of the school if I kept that up. But my last year, I just got very disillusioned. I lost interest. I lost hope that it would mean anything, and I stopped trying. And I had a couple B's and a C, something like that. And that broke my summa cum laude. That broke my GPA. I still graduated magna cum laude because I still did well, relatively well, and I did well up until that point. But yeah. So I guess I just wanted to kind of rationalize my narrative of my life, why things have went the way they have, and things. When I was in the middle of high school, I really did not like school. I did not like being conformist. I did not like institutions, and yeah, I just was very sick of school. So I didn't try. I didn't do anything in high school. If I could get away with not doing it, I didn't do it. I got into graffiti. I guess when you're disadvantaged, when you're poor, when you have broken family, somehow the idea of becoming famous or getting your name out there and people seeing your name on a wall seems like a good idea. Probably almost died a few times. One time I wanted to walk to the town over, so I walked on the highway like in the middle of the night. I could have died easily, but halfway there I just decided this is a horrible idea. I can die, and I walked home. Yeah, so being from like a poor, disadvantaged family, having a broken family, having a lot of life stresses, you just get your values mixed up apparently. I've only really been when it comes to like girls relationships. I don't have kids. I've never been married, and I've been wondering where it comes from. I really don't know, but I only except for like momentary, temporary attractions. I've really only ever been attracted to girls who are very pure, who seem like they have never really had a boyfriend before or never had sex before, or through like culture or ways of living, ways of dressing, ways of acting. They just seem very reserved. Like they just would never cheat. They just, yeah, they're just very pure, very reserved, very modest. My whole life, I've only been interested in girls like that. And people never understood it. But the more I think about it, the more I try to like trace like where did it come from. Is it because my mom's family like was Mormon like 3 generations ago, and somehow that got translated into like the values and beliefs my mom raised me with? Is it like a genetic thing? Like maybe some people are just born like they're only attracted to people who are pure and very, very, very like trustworthy and reliable. And maybe it's a life histories thing. There's this idea called life history theory. I reread it in Douglas Kenrick's book, The Rational Animal, but I'm sure you could read it in tons of like social psychology, evolutionary history, human nature type of books. Like, and this is like, I don't understand why no one reads books. That's kind of why I started making videos, is because people just won't read a book. The amount of people in society today who will read a book about something are extremely low. The people who do read books probably read popular fiction, maybe popular self-help or finance self-help. The amount of people who read like real good books is like such an infinitesimally small, microscopically small, anatomically small portion of society that it's just insane to me. To me, it's insane because I grew up reading books, but like no one I've met has read Jared Diamond or Paul Ehrlich, like just Charles C. Mann. I mean, I could go on. Richard Nisbet. I don't know. Robert Wright, Timothy Wilson, but also Edward O. Wilson, just all these books that would teach you about like human nature and cultures and evolution and social psychology and behavioral economics. Like no one, I would understand if like you have a hobby, you only want to read books on economics, or you only want to read books on evolution or cultures or comparative history of societies or psychology. But literally no one I've met has read books like these, like books like smart, intelligent, respected authors, science authors. Like no one. I would understand like if you only read one type of book, but no one I've met even does that. They don't read any books. But yeah, so life history theory. This is from Douglas Kenrick, but I'm sure it comes up in like other books on human nature and like evolution and social psychology. It's this idea that like rationally you can kind of interpret that, you can kind of analyze people's behaviors as being based on their opportunities and the expected lifespan, length of their life, and the expected outcomes of their life, and like disorder and like unpredictability of their life. So people who are very poor, who come from unpredictable, unstable homes, like they tend to do things that are more dangerous in life. And it's kind of rational if you think about it, because if you aren't sure that you're going to make it until 40, you're not sure if you can hold a full-time job or you can go to college and get a college degree, maybe it makes sense to like risk it all and become like a criminal and try to make money stealing. Maybe that's the only way you can become rich. And they use that to explain why a lot of poor people become athletes or actors, because even though the chances are 1 in a million, somehow their brain tells them that, well, they're not going to get rich holding a regular job. They're not going to have a reliable life, stable life to get a college degree or get married like the traditional way. So why don't they try to like take this 1 in a million shot of becoming an athlete or a celebrity? So life history theories could like kind of, you can use that to try to interpret how people make bad life decisions when they come from unstable homes, because they just rationally cannot expect that their life will be stable enough, long enough for them to make like good life decisions and like do things the slow way. Maybe they have to take a risk and do things. They make it or break it, like fast type of lifestyle. So that's life history theory. But yeah, so I was thinking like maybe life history theory could explain like why I'm attracted to the only girls that I'm attracted to. Maybe that has something to do with like coming from an extremely unstable family, and coming from an extremely poor upbringing, and coming from, I don't know, being the only one in my family. I don't have cousins or siblings, never did. Have a very small family. That's like another disadvantage, is I never really had the family, social, emotional support that probably the vast majority of people, even if you're like a poor black person living in an urban community, you probably still have like cousins and uncles and like, I don't know, brothers and stuff like that, but I never did. So, yeah, maybe if you just come from such an unstable, unpredictable life and you're the only person left in your family, then maybe you like ultra conservative, like overly emphasize something like that, like just being completely safe. I don't know, but yeah. So I suppose I also wanted to say, like, when I was in like middle school, because I had a single mom and she worked, like I went to after school programs when school was over. But a lot of times I would just go to where my mom worked at the library, and I just read lots of books there. And my mom would take me to bookstores. I don't know if it's part of the way she was raised or what it is, but we just cared about books. We read books. And so at an early age, maybe 8 years old, 10 years old, I started reading books that I thought were cool, books on Albert Einstein, books on science, books on philosophy, books on whatever. And I was raised to like just read books, learn things, be intelligent. Yeah, and it's always struck me as odd that like the vast majority of people were not raised that way. They just don't care about reading books. They don't care about learning. Yeah, so I guess the real point of this was just to try to explain like how, I don't know. In my life, it's just people assume that because my skin is white and I went to a nice school, and honestly, I work as much as I can, and I've spent it buying like nice clothes, nice shoes. People just assume like I must have just come from like a nice suburban, like good family, like good neighborhood. People assume I come from white privilege, and it's like the complete opposite. Like I come from absolute like worst conditions imaginable almost. And it's just so frustrating that people don't understand like what I've been through, how much work I've done to make it this far. And people just assume I come from white privilege, and it's the complete opposite. I'm half Native American. I have white skin, but I'm half Native American. My father's family comes from complete poverty. I don't know. They've been disadvantaged. They never were able to buy a house, probably because they were never able to get a loan, probably because the loan officers were racist in the 80s when my grandpa would have bought a house on my dad's side. And yeah, it's just, they come from uneducated, poor families. They left their reservations. My grandpa left. He didn't live on the reservation, but he lived off the reservation. Probably, I mean, he told me he went to like Native American church school, where like half of them were speaking Sioux, and they were going to church and learning in Sioux. And he didn't. He learned English, and he went to the trade school or something. But yeah, and my grandma lived on the reservation, right off of like an Apache fort that the U.S. Army would hire them to like help them scout around the area or something. And yeah, she lived off the reservation. Like, I don't know if she lived in a teepee, but her family lived in the reservation. My aunt tells me that when they visited her family, my grandma's family, like they didn't speak English, they spoke Apache. So like people say they're Native American, but they're saying they're like 1/16th, 1/32nd Native American. Like some grandma's grandma was like Native American. Like my grandma and grandpa were from reservations. Like they tried to get by and like come to California, and I don't know, I'm the result of that. Like it's really frustrating to like come from like a history of like that, like a whole half my family, like their ancestors were murdered, they were placed on reservations, they were in abject poverty, and they just barely scraped by, and they just barely were able to like have my dad and have me. And yeah, just people just assume I come from white privilege or something. Yeah, and maybe that's about all. I've been reading, as unpopular as it is, and as much as people just don't understand why you would do it, I've been reading Mein Kampf by Hitler. And honestly, I guess people haven't read the book because they just assume. Well, honestly, people don't know the context at all of that history. I wanted to learn the context, and so I read books. I read In the Name of Eugenics by Cavils. I read there are other books. There's Robert Whitaker's book, Mad in America. There's Robert Proctor's books, Racial Hygiene, and The Nazi War on Cancer. And yeah, like if you knew the context for World War II, you would not think that Hitler was the cause of it. Like actually most of the world, most of America and Great Britain were extremely racist against Jews, extremely racist against anyone who wasn't white, who wasn't WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant from Northern Europe specifically. They were racist against Italians. There was a lot of backdrop for the idea that you should just exterminate a race. There were plenty of Americans and British who were publishing books on eugenics saying exactly that. And the Germans and Hitler just picked up on it, and they tried to do it. Luckily, they didn't, and the whole world basically, stopped them. Unlike the whites in America, who killed the Native Americans, no one banded together to stop white people, but the whole world banded together to stop Germany and Hitler. Lucky for the Jews, not lucky for the Native Americans. But so I've been reading Mein Kampf, and honestly, if you just read the book, you can tell the trajectory of how his beliefs kind of changed over the course of his life. Here's a guy who had abusive parents, and at 13 both of his parents died. He had to go work and make a living on his own. He had a horrible life, and he just learned that everyone hates each other. There's class warfare, there's ethnic warfare, and he just tried to come up with this idea to get Germany to come together as one nation, together, fighting for the same cause. And he picked up on what Americans and British were doing with the eugenics movement, and he made it about Jewish people. But and that's I've been thinking that it's not just there's nothing special about white people that make them murderous, horrible, genocidal people. Most ethnic groups, whenever they get the chance, they do try to exterminate or overrun neighboring ethnic groups. That's political realist, game theory. That's just what people do. And then they just rationalize it post hoc by saying that they were on the right, or their God was the right one, or whatever. But honestly, it makes a certain amount of sense. If you're a poor German, working class German, and it's all the doctors and politicians and rich people are Jewish, maybe you would come up with this crazy conspiracy that they're somehow controlling everything. And it in some sense it makes sense. The same way that a lot of black people have this paranoid belief about systemic racism. White people are just all out to disadvantage and kill black people. Same thing, just with Germans and Jewish. And it's kind of an ethnic pushback. If one ethnic group becomes extremely powerful, then the other ethnic group just tries to push back. And, all around the world this happens with different genocides and ethnic violence. And honestly, the only thing different with the Germans was just the scale of it, the organized strategic scale of it, and the fact that the whole world basically banded together to stop them. That doesn't happen in Rwanda or Cambodia or something. The whole world doesn't band together to stop other ethnic groups from pretty much exterminating each other. So pretty sick. But I've been reading the book, trying to understand why he believed what he did. And honestly, I see parallels with my life, because here I am, from a broken family, worst life conditions imaginable almost, and just trying to get by, trying to understand the world, trying to understand why people hate each other so much. So anyway, I just wanted to I suppose, I don't know, I thought maybe this would be useful. If not for other people, it'd be useful for me, just to summarize kind of my the highlights of my life, the bad parts at least, that kind of influenced why I am the way I am. So there is no overarching ethical or moral message, or just like the real world, there's no real progress, there's no real ethical role. It's just things happen and you make the most out of it and you rationalize what happened. So suppose that's it. I did mainly, honestly, when I was turning in the bed, not able to sleep. What I wanted to do was what I did. I wanted to kind of just give highlights of my life, how broken my family was, how poor my upbringing was, and kind of cue in like ideas that I've been reading lately about like social psychology or evolution, like Razib Khan's work on like the Jan Maya, this idea of Christmas and Odin worship and Yule, and how the Christians, what my anthropology teacher told us was that essentially what happened was the Christians, well, Christianity was entering into Northern Europe, the Scandinavians, and it turns out you cannot just completely convert a whole group of people into your religion. Doesn't work very well. Actually, it what surprises me all the time is when I hear about Samoans or Native Americans even who are extremely religious, like Christian religious. And I think, don't you know that like the only reason you're Christian is because white people came, killed like most of your people, and put the rest of you in reservations and forced you to learn Christianity? Like, don't you know that like that was forced on you and they killed like most of your ancestors to do that? And you like you completely adopt it like wholeheartedly. Like that just completely boggles my mind. And I think part of it is that people just don't know the history. People don't read books. They don't read Jared Diamond. They don't read David Snar. They don't read Paul Ehrlich. They just don't know the history. They don't read Charles Seaman. But yeah, so when the Christians were coming to like Christianize the Scandinavians, the way that my cultural anthropology professor told me is like, look, they couldn't just say, forget about all your beliefs and all your traditions and just become Christian. They had to kind of work it in, maybe unconsciously. Maybe it was like this unconscious progress or process, but they basically said, look at all these things you're already doing. You like this guy, this Odin. You like hanging things on trees and visiting each other in the middle of winter to give each other, gifts and alcohol or something. Why don't you, why don't you just reinterpret that? And actually, this is a Christian thing. This is for Christ that you do all this, and it's not Odin, it's Santa Claus. And they kind of like appropriated the Scandinavian Norse, the Yule, into Christmas. And honestly, with all I know about, well, what I've read, I would like to reappropriate Yule from Christmas and, take out the Christian part, because the Christian part, I mean, you can read Joseph Henrik, The Weirdest People in the World, and be very convinced that Christianity is a very good thing, and it somehow leads to progress and social order and things like that. But, I've read enough cultural anthropology that I don't really believe that necessarily. I think, you need strong institutions. You need, without strong institutions, without organized monopolization of violence like government and police, most societies are extremely violent. The early Europeans were extremely violent people. They were constantly conquering and killing each other off. And, I don't think there's anything special about Christianity. You can have Yule and the Norse traditions of just celebrating the middle of winter and helping each other out or whatever. It doesn't have to be in the lens of Christ, Christianity, Christmas. It can just be Yule. Yeah, so I guess that's about it. I don't expect anyone to watch this. I just do it. I don't do it for views. I do it for my own thing. I don't know. And if someone is somehow benefited or gets something out of it, then good. But yeah. So that's all.